Hello all, I think we'll get started. Thank you all very, very much for coming to this event, which is all about protecting nature, and it's about solutions, and it's about, we're going to focus on three things: the nationally determined contributions, the NDCs, the laws, and the data that we think can really drive change. So over the course of the next 90 minutes, you're going to hear from leading NGOs alongside the Brazilian Ministry of Agriculture to highlight the solutions that can help drive real change around deforestation and nature loss. Deforestation is responsible for 11% of our global greenhouse gas emissions. In a country like Brazil, it's responsible for 50% of their greenhouse gas emissions, which is why Brazil has such a focus on tackling this issue now. So what that's clear is that there is absolutely, I mean, we're at a climate conference, there is no way to any of our net zero targets without a solution to nature loss and without a solution to deforestation. My name is Darren McKenzie. For about 20 years, I know it doesn't look like it, but I was a journalist for the BBC, telling stories. Now, I'm still telling stories, but telling a different story. I work for Global Canopy, and what we do is we target the market forces that are destroying nature. And nature is critical at a conference like this. It is part of the twin crises that we face, the climate crisis and the nature crisis. So as I've said, we're looking at three separate issues. We're looking at laws, we're looking at data, and we're looking at nationally determined contributions. You're going to hear from leading NGOs in this space. You're going to hear from FERN, you're going to hear from WWF, you're going to hear from ISPN, Global Canopy, and NWF. But you're also going to hear from a government perspective. And you're going to hear from a government perspective because collaboration is going to have to be key, okay? We have to work together if we're going to solve these problems. It's the only way to come up with real solutions. So let's start with a perspective from the Brazilian government. Lucimara Chiari is the director at the Secretary for Sustainable Development and Innovation at the Brazilian Ministry of Agriculture, and she's going to put into perspective why Brazil is taking this so seriously.
Thank you, Daryl. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Lucimara Chiari. I'm Minister of Agriculture and Livestock in Brazil. Brazil is seen as one of few emerging economies that was being early concerned with sustainable agriculture, development and nature protection, showing as an important agriculture player deal with nature conservation. In short, farmers are not enemies, but guardians of nature. For accomplishing such progress, Brazil has over 3 decades focused on public policies, including laws, regulations, monitoring, and incentives to support its ambitious and/or NDCs. A new decree is being signed this week to promote conversion of the great cattle pastures into sustainable food farms. This single action solves 3 problems at once: improves food production, eliminates pressure for forest, and fixes carbon in the soil. Brazil has created NDCs related to agriculture and supports farmers on their challenger in this regard. But the country has also improved its environmental legislation that is now considered and consolidated and can be considered fair for both agriculture and nature. Among other tools, Brazil has created the CAR, that would free translate as Environmental Register for Farms, that in essence not only demonstrate all land use present in the farm, request any license involving interfaces on its local natural environment. This tool has become so powerful that banks and large commodity traders, before making business with farmers, requires an update statement of the farm's CAR, issued by the local environmental authority. This regulation is an important and robust tool effectively reconciling nature and production.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So, as I said, what we've got to do is we've got to find ways of working together. And what we are here to show you is that this is not an impossible problem. It is a solvable crisis. So let's start by having a look at laws. This year has been a remarkable year when it comes to deforestation. The EUDR is the world's first international due diligence law tackling deforestation. But there are going to be other laws in other jurisdictions that could follow, the UK Environment Act, the Forest Act in the US. What we have to do is we have to try and find a way of making these laws effective. So, Nicole from FERN, you are here to start us off. You're FERN's Sustainable Consumption and Production Campaigner. What does that mean?
Thank you very much for this introduction. I hope you can hear me well. I'm Nicole from FERN, and I'm the Sustainable Consumption and Production Campaigner. FERN is an advocacy organization that for 30 years has helped to improve EU policies for the protection of forests and the respect of people who depend on forests. Now let's look at the problem. Deforestation is a wicked problem. You all know it. It has many causes. Conversion of forest for agriculture is one of them. Land speculation is another one. Insecure land tenure is an underlying driver as well. And because we have so many reasons, we also need many solutions. And thanks for the Brazilian representative of having enumerated some national ones. So many polls have shown in Europe, but also in other jurisdictions, that citizens and consumers no longer want to be associated with these underlying drivers with deforestation. And companies have started action, or some have started a narrative. So if we go a bit back in time, we've seen companies take commitments to phase out deforestation until 2020. And many governments, states had done the same under the Sustainable Development Goals. We're in 2023, we know collectively we have all failed. But let's look at December 2023. Let's look at the positive sides. Already a year ago, the EU has adopted the first law on deforestation, anti-deforestation in supply chains. And we really have to commend the European Union to be brave. While it's only the second, or in some cases the third largest market, for products that drive deforestation to have taken action as the first trading bloc. To regulate commodities, 7 commodities and associated products that are most heavily associated with deforestation and forest degradation. What can this law do? This law can help improve the situation, can help to reduce deforestation, forest degradation, but also help implement national laws. It can help improve forest governance. And why is that so? Because the EUDR, the EU Deforestation Regulation, does not only require of companies to check whether deforestation is in their supply chains, but also whether companies and the supply chain have not contributed to violating international human rights norms and standards, such as free, prior, and informed consent, if enshrined into national law. And this is why it can further the enforcement in really looking at this problem in detail. It is a market that's demanding that, and usually when markets demand that, things start to happen. There have been many reactions, so we think positively that the companies affected will start to take action. Nevertheless, the EU cannot solve that problem alone. Many important consumer markets will have to follow suit. A lot of people are talking about China, about emerging markets, about India, buying a lot of beef and soya, driving deforestation. There's a lot of data out there, and I know the colleagues have prepared it well, so we're gonna hear all about it. So we really need to work all together. We had a climate conference, and reduced emissions from deforestation and forest degradation will be necessary to meet those goals. So I hope the negotiators are negotiating well now to find a solution to really check how to deal with the emissions from deforestation. And there's also an incentive in the EU deforestation law, a bridge between nationally determined contributions, the law, and our climate conference. So if in your national determined contribution the emissions from deforestation and degradation are well accounted of, if the laws in producer countries are transparent, if there are possibilities for civil society to check laws and enforce, then these countries will get a better risk rating, something that needs maybe a little bit of explanation, but it's one of the tools that can help make those bridges. So I hope the negotiators will go on well, and we will have a successful COP, we'll have national successful policies, and we have companies that implement the EUDR well.
Thank you very much. You see in front of you I was going to say a smorgasbord of different NGOs, all with different expertise in this field. We are all working together to try and solve this problem. So what we need for laws to work is we need laws to be effective. Jean, you're going to talk to us about traceability.
The traceability to the farm level is a key requirement of the UDR, and it looks like being a game changer. So I hardly had experienced so much fuss, so much interest in discussing that legislation. There is not one meeting I'm participating since last year that is not on the table. In Europe, in Brazil, in China, everywhere it is moving the needle. And so we need to make sure that this is going to the right way. What I wanted to say is this transparency it's a right from consumer, and the UDR started as a consumer requirement with more than 1 million signatures. So these consumers wanted to make sure that they would not contribute to climate change by importing products from deforestation and land destruction. And so it's a right to know what people consume. It's a right they have, of course. And it's also, transparency is also essential to verify the credibility of the information that is provided. Is it true? How can we make sure that what is said is real? And is it feasible? Well, actually it is. But there are resistance to change. And so we are now willing to overcome this resistance and demonstrate that we have very strong clue on how to implement this legislation and go into that transition. And from this transition, take all the opportunities that we can take. So this is a bit an example of why it is going beyond individual consumers' right. You're having a lot of land conflicts, sometimes violent illegalities that are committed towards local communities. If you're having full traceability to the farm level, you can detect who is buying the products from these lands specifically, and you can identify this, and that is a critical element against land encroachment, against protected area invasion. So you're having here specific examples where abuses were committed and no one would take the blame on buying soy from these areas. Soy, a lot of soy is produced there, but it seems that it's going into smoke. Like it's not bought by anyone. And so this is where I think the game changer lies, and that can be highly protective also of indigenous and local communities' rights. Next, please. And so a traceability system, we already have benchmarked several, like the soy moratorium in the Amazon, since 2006, 2008, which is a good benchmark, and we learned things that can be done better and things that can, that really proved very robust. But also lately, we have been working on the salmon industry benchmarking on a green supplier traceability. So it's a traceability system that proves that the supplier is full 100% deforestation free and conversion free, not only the part of the commodity that is going to specific customers. And so, so we learned from that, and we learned that you need to involve all suppliers in a whole territory. The risk is spread everywhere. It can be more concentrated in some place, but it's existing everywhere. And so a traceability system is not more expensive if it's wider than it's narrower, because you're using the same set of data for all the areas. So you should try to be consistent in all the places you're sourcing from. You need, of course, to attend the market requirement, as I said before, but it has to be, the methodology that is used to verify needs to be transparent. You need to be open to explain exactly how you're making your control. And you have to have, of course, a third-party verification, independent verification system. It doesn't need to be, the information doesn't need to be 100% public if you're having privacy or, or economic interests that need to protect, but you need to have access to that information to be able to control, especially the geolocalized information, so that you can check on the ground what is happening in these places. It has to be also cheap and affordable and as simple as possible. Too complex systems also are very difficult to verify. Next. So, yeah, it is doable. So there are progress in traceability. We've seen, several commitments on that. We see that companies do not seem to be afraid of committing to that. The thing is that we know that, for instance, for soy, yes, traders know exactly where they are buying from, especially for their direct suppliers. And indirect suppliers, they can know it if you overcome some resistance from the indirect suppliers, but it's also feasible. It is feasible for the cocoa industry, even if you're having hundreds of thousands of suppliers. We have seen extraordinary progress in transparency for cocoa as well. A lot of challenge, yes, but unfeasible, certainly not. And that traceability can also happen in the large scale and provide opportunities for smallholders. We can talk a bit more on this as well. Next, please. So yes, we've seen some very interesting systems, like in Maranhão, that are involving a partnership between private and the public sector. So you can have data that is on social data, you can have geographical data, you can have also commercial data that allows you to be overcome, and you are creating a very robust system. Maranhão is not a state that is an easy state. It's at the front line of expansion and transition between the Cerrado and the Amazon. It's a place where you have a lot of land conflicts. it's one of the most challenging states to do that, and they have one of the most robust systems in place through this partnership between state and between the authorities and also the private sector to have full transparency. I will not explain the details because it's quite complex, and myself, I'm not sure I understand 100% of it. But yes, but it is not an idea. It is something that is already implemented, and it's a burden of proof that we are having. Next, please. And so it's this is just an information. That's an image of the system, how it is. So you're having a farm limit, and you can control what has happened on the farm in the past years, and you can do that like in 2 clicks. So next, please. And for cattle also, you are having in other states a green label system that is in Pará, that is also making its proof as being extremely robust for batch control, not individual cattle control, but for batch control it works quite well and serves the purpose of giving more transparency to the farm level as well. So for cattle it's a bit complicated because cattle goes from one farm to another. It's not like soy. It's like it's burned in some place, then it can grow in another place, then it can be fattened in a third one, and then it will be slaughtered. And so it's a bit more challenging, but yes, systems now are adapted to that, and they can work. Of course, in all these systems, you have to face the resistance of some part of the sector that is not willing to, provide necessarily all the information. And this is where the balance between the demand and the offer can operate so that solutions can be set. But technically, yes, it's another proof that it works. That's it. Not next one, please. So this system is being established in several states here. You see most of them are in the Amazon, in the Cerrado, and in the transition between Amazon and Cerrado. So it's not in quiet places. It's in bumpy places. Yeah. Next, please.
That's the lot for slides.
Okay.
For some reason.
It's the last one?
No, there isn't another.
Yeah,
There isn't another.
Okay. Well, I think I made the point I wanted, and I'm open for any discussion and debate. Thank you.
So, thank you, and apologies. Unfortunately for all of these fine NGOs, I was the technical person on point, so I might have missed a slide. But we're going to have time for questions at the end. So what's just been shown is that traceability is a challenge and has historically been a challenge, but there are now solutions to that challenge. What you want with laws is you want laws to be effective and to work and to protect all biomes, and that's the point of our next presentation. Guilherme is such a gentleman that when we didn't have quite enough seats up here, he sat down, which means he should be listened to doubly. Guilherme.
Yeah. Hello, thanks everybody for listening us here. And my question here is about the Cerrado, because we have been seeing there in Brazil different situations regarding human rights violations and the increasing of deforestation in the last years in the Cerrado. And regulations like this EUDR could lead to conservation strategies, conservation of biodiversity, and also for climate goals. Then, Darren, please. I would like just to let you know the Cerrado. Cerrado is present in 11 Brazilian states in the middle of the country, and it's connecting different biomes there: Amazon, Mata Atlântica, Pampa, Caatinga. And the Cerrado plays a fundamental role in biodiversity conservation. Is the most biodiverse savanna in the world, and it's quite important for water also and carbon stocks there. Please. For water, just to mention, 8 of the 12 biggest basins, river basins in Brazil, came from the Cerrado, and 40% of the water in the Brazil, the fresh water, comes from the Cerrado. The Cerrado feeds the different hydropower systems that account for 8% of our electricity in Brazil. And please, also for biodiversity, the Cerrado is one of the most important rock spot, most threatened rock spot in the world. And there is a lack of protection. Only 0.1% of the Cerrado is set aside for traditional populations and local communities. And regarding climate, it's an important global stock, and most of the carbon, like 2/3, is stored underground. And there are people there, invisibilized people there, living there. Almost 12% of the Brazilian population lives in the Cerrado, in the cities and in the fields. And among them there are lots of different, like 83 different ethnic groups, indigenous people, and quilombola communities, and several different traditional local communities living there, like Geraizeiro, Coco Babaçu, Breakers, and different others. They are intimately linked to the environment where they live, and they are under intense pressure from the expansion of farming and livestock. And this is what about the Jean was mentioned about the importance of traceability. Please. And they have enormous cultural heritage, local and traditional knowledge and practices with their livelihoods. And it's promoting conservation. Then we can address the legislation and public policies to protect these people and to protect their territories. We will be achieving our biodiversity conservation goals and climate goals, please. But the agribusiness there is increasing in the last years. Almost half of the agriculture in Brazil is in the Cerrado. And the expansion of the agribusiness has caused displacement of local communities and traditional people. Please. Here is information from the map biomas, the recent report on deforestation, showing how the deforestation is increasing in the biome. In 2001 to 2002, 31.2% of variation of increasing in the deforestation. And this year, the most recent data from our national institute shows that the Cerrado has already achieved 11,000 kilometers of deforestation. Please. This is the region in Mato Piba, where you can see in the pictures the expansion of the deforestation. And they are going on the places, on the fields where traditional people used to live, and they are a kind of land grabbing their territories and provoking this displacement. Please. And there are some names that should be mentioned. More than half of the deforestation and conversion in the Cerrado is caused by soil. And they are linked to important producers and companies. And also meat packers. And also some banks. They are exposed to the risk of deforestation in the biome. Please. And what comes next? We are looking in the future, and we see that the Cerrado is the most threatened biome, the most threatened global rock spot, and with the least legal protection in the world. And the agribusiness can still legally convert another 16 million hectares according to Soterron, 2013, in 23, and its impact will be devastating for also economy, as I mentioned, the importance of the biome to provide different ecosystem services for food, for electricity, for even pollination, different services, and will be affecting also all the population, please. And my key remarks here is that expanding the Cerrado conservation ambition demands essentially on regulations like this UDR and others that could prohibit companies from buying basic products associated with deforestation and conversion. And the UDR on commodity free of deforestation and rights violations can also play a crucial role for the conservation of the Cerrado and its traditional people. However, the legislation did not include other wooded lands in their scope. Then it is needed to address this issue, and we are pushing and advocating for this, considering the importance for all the stuff that I just mentioned and the protection of population that lives and depend of the Cerrado. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So laws are a crucial part of the puzzle because the data that you've seen today speaks for itself. We're not seeing the change at the speed and at the scale that we need. So we need regulation to help drive that change. One thing, Guilherme mentioned companies, and he mentioned financial institutions. What companies and financial institutions have said for a long time is that they don't have the data, they don't have the information to be able to know what is happening. That has changed now. The data landscape over the last 5-10 years has been transformed, and now we are able to provide companies and financial institutions with the data on how they are exposed to nature loss and deforestation, where the deforestation is happening, where success is happening, and all of those things. So the next sort of section, I suppose, we're going to talk about is data, and the data that can drive solutions. Lusamara, do you want to?
Well, I give an example of the public politic in Central Brazil, in state of Mato Grosso do Sul, has 13% of its surface covered by Pantanal biome. Wetland was cattle ranching was stable for over 3 centuries. Today, Pantaneiro farmers are suffering for reducing margins and laws that were designed for the highlands. The local government proposed a new, for instance, very innovative law, combining economic use of these low-flowable areas with cattle ranches, with, for instance, prevents huge wildfires by reducing biomass. The legislation contains specific provisions regarding the prevention and combat of illegal deforestation. It prioritizes permanent preservation areas of springs and aquifer-regarded zones, enabling the formation of ecology corridors of vegetation recovery. It also will promote the restoration, my English not is good, of regarding areas through fiscal incentives, financial support, and credits. Furthermore, it encourages environmental certification of activities and the traceability of sustainable production chains developing in this area. This kind of initiative has potential to preserve this important biome, connecting funding with practice and conservation. That's it.
I've already mentioned, thank you very much. I've already mentioned the organisation that I work for, Global Canopy. We are a data-driven not-for-profit, and what we do is we target the market forces that are destroying nature, and we provide those companies and those financial institutions with the data that can drive change in the boardrooms. My colleague Andre Vasconcelos is here to talk to us about some of that data that we produce.
Thanks, Darren, and thanks everyone here. So first, I just wanted to take a step back here and reflect that a lot of the deforestation that we are talking about here actually happens in producing countries or in tropical countries, but a lot of that is actually exported to other countries. So I think we need to reflect about the importance of the demand. So how can the consumer markets and also the traders, the companies that are involved in those supply chains actually play a role and contribute to addressing that problem. And that's exactly what we do in Global Canopy, looking at from the consumer side. And here I wanted to talk about one analysis that we did recently. But before that, I just wanted to contextualize and say that globally, or in average, between 50 and 90% of the deforestation is linked directly or indirectly to agriculture expansion. Of course, this would depend on the country or the commodity that we are talking about, and a lot of that drives or generates emissions, right? Drives climate impact because of especially the land use change. So next one. So this new analysis that we did in TRACE looked at what is the extent of these emissions that are caused by the expansion of agriculture onto forested areas, onto other wooded lands in the Cerrado, as Guilherme said, in ecosystems like the Cerrado, in forested areas, and so on. So we looked at 5 commodities, including beef, soybeans, palm oil, pulp, and cocoa, in 6 countries that you are, or 7 countries that you are seeing on the screen. Next slide, please. And what we found is that the emissions linked to the expansion of those commodities, as I said, via the land use change, accounts for 444 million tons of CO2 emissions. And just for comparison, this is the equivalent of all the emissions of the UK, including transport, energy, and so on. And if we include peat subsidence, thanks Darren, this increased to over 700 million tons of CO2 emissions. Here we are talking about the whole of emissions generated by Germany. Next slide, please. If we break down this number, looking at which commodities are, and which country, or commodities in this case, sorry, are the ones that are causing more emissions due to this expansion, we are looking here at half of that is from beef, and then palm oil and wood pulp also have a lot of carbon footprint when it comes to the expansion. Next slide, please. If we look at the countries that are exposed to those emissions because of the importing those commodities, we see that China here plays a key role and is highly exposed to these emissions. Because just to take a step back, sorry, I was talking about emissions at a territorial level, right? But then connecting this to exports, we see that the total emissions linked to exports is 282 million tons, and a lot of that is related to China, and then Middle East and North Africa, India, and the EU. Next slide, please. And as I mentioned, a lot of the demand for those commodities are actually coming from developed countries. So it's critical that these importing markets take actions to really help to drive this. I think this is a key message that we need to think about, that collaboration. The UDR comes at a good place, sending a signal to the producing countries. Important to mention that it doesn't need to reinvent the wheel, but rather support already existing mechanisms. For example, in Brazil, you have the forest code and so on. But yet, all these emissions that are associated with the consumer markets is not included into the NDCs. So we will hear later from our colleagues from NWF more on that. But I wanted to put this reflection here for us as well. Next one. And looking at the traders that export those commodities, we see that they also play a key role in that. So, because we know that traders, they sit in the mid part of the market. So we look at, if we think about beef, for example, we know that there are millions and millions of producers. We know that there are millions and millions of consumers. But we know that the traders, the companies that export, is very concentrated. So they have a lot of power and leverage to help to address this problem. And just the 7 traders most exposed to these emissions together account for almost 50% or 43% of the total exported deforestation-linked emissions. Next one. So here are the companies that we are talking about, these 7 companies that we think they have a lot of leverage and can play a key role in contributing to this transition. Obviously, it's not going to happen overnight, but they have a key role to play here. And just these 7 companies, if they clean up the whole supply, it will be the equivalent of Paraguay going net zero emissions. So here, just to show the importance of and the leverage of those companies. Next one. So just to wrap up, I just wanted to highlight first that the emissions from agriculture expansion is huge when it comes to, here we are only talking about land use change. Obviously, there is a transportation, there is for production itself. So it's huge and should not be underlooked. Second, that importing markets can and should play a key role in the solutions. And finally, that these trading companies, which are in the bottleneck of the supply chain, can also have a huge leverage and can make a difference to address this problem. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andre. So one part of the puzzle is having a look at companies. Another part of the puzzle is having a look at financial institutions. And Pei Chi Wong is our financial institution expert, and she's here to explain all.
Yes, I agree with Andre that companies have the leverage, and so do financial institutions. So at Global Canopy, we focus on guiding and supporting financial institutions to end the financing of deforestation, conversion, and associated human rights abuses in their financial portfolios, because financial institutions have the power to influence and leverage the companies that they lend to and invest in to change the way they operate, to make their operations and their supply chains sustainable and deforestation and abuse-free. And how do they do this? We have the solutions in the form of data and guidance for financial institutions. So, as Darren mentioned, the data landscape transformation that has happened over the last couple of years has been incredible. And also the demand and the understanding and awareness of that data has also increasingly scaled up. And that is why this year can be different and action can be accelerated. So in November, Global Canopy has launched Forest IQ, which is a common database of the world-leading, most rigorous data on companies' exposure to deforestation and how they perform on policies and implementation of those policies to mitigate those deforestation risks. So Forest IQ brings together data from NGOs and organizations that have worked on deforestation for decades. So these are very well understood, well established, and credible data sets. It covers over 2,000 companies that are most exposed to these forest risk commodity supply chains. So I have to say that the coverage of deforestation data and the accessibility of deforestation data for financial institutions has never been better before, because the other innovation that Forest IQ is bringing is to link all these world-leading data sets together using financial identifiers, which then enables financial institutions to quickly and easily integrate that with their engagement processes. So how do they use that data? So at Global Canopy, we have produced a comprehensive set of guidance, not only helping financial institutions understand the data and how to use it, but also providing lots of practical actions and signposting to lots of resources from our partners on how to engage their clients and how to assess the risks in their financial portfolio. And this guidance is going to be supported and scaled up even more with launch of Forest IQ, because it enables financial institutions to now easily look at company-specific data at one glance, to look at where companies are doing well or not doing so well, and that can really inform very granular and productive engagement conversations, because that is the mechanism by which financial institutions must leverage their influence and financing of supply chain companies. It's through engagement with companies that are not compliant with deforestation and conversion-free operations and supply chains, and with escalating that engagement towards real consequences for companies that are not willing to comply despite repeated engagements. And the reality is that with tightening regulation, companies and financial institutions can no longer wait any longer. And we don't have to wait any longer, because bringing together the data and guidance, we find that there's a really powerful solution already in front of us. We can't wait for the data to be perfect, but there's already enough to get started. Data can only get better when policy signals start aligning, and private sector actions from corporates and financial institutions through their policies and implementation align together to create real change in supply chains. This is not something that financial institutions can wait to do, because there are going to be real financially material consequences when the EUDR comes into effect. When companies are found to be non-compliant, they may face financial penalties of up to 4% of their annual EU turnover, and that is significant. And financial institutions who get a head start on identifying how ready their portfolio companies are to meet these requirements are not only managing their business risks, they will be ahead of the pack in terms of managing their reputational risks, their market access risks, their policy risks, their legal risks, because sooner or later, these due diligence regulations will also extend to cover the financial sector. And finally, that it's also extremely important for the financial institutions to do their part to manage the fiscal risks that are only going to get worse if climate change escalates, and that threatens the entire economic model of the forests and the ecosystems that we depend on for our food, for what we eat, materials that we depend on. So this is something that financial institutions can do, and you can do now. You can ask clients and investee companies to start investing in these solutions and start reporting on their deforestation exposures and what they're doing to manage them, and they can ask data providers to start collecting that data. And together, as Darren said, we can work together, collaborate on these solutions, and bring us towards the deforestation-free future that we desperately need. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So what we're trying to do with this event is it's in 3 parts, and at the start of each part what we want to bring you is a perspective from government to try and show that NGOs like us and governments can work, are working on the problem. Sometimes we disagree, sometimes we agree, but what we need to do is we need to collaborate, and we need to come up with solutions together. So the last bit that we're focusing on are NDCs, nationally determined contributions. Every country has to have them. Brazil has them. Lucy Murray, do you want to come and talk about Brazil?
Yes, Brazil has created major NDCs involving the agricultural sector. We have many public policies, and public policies designed by the Ministry of Agriculture and Livestock to be effective needed to have the engagement of these subnational structures, especially when we are talking about the Amazon biome. The more sustainable Amazon plan is designed with the engagement of all the legal Amazon states. But how does we build this? First of all, in Brazil, we have the Interstate Consortium for Sustainable Development of Legal Amazon. The consortium has 9 states: Acre, Amapá, Amazonas, Maranhão, Mato Grosso, Pará, Rondônia, Roraima, and Tocantins. It helps to implement a regional policy in Amazon, as we can have the support of the consortium. So, the approach was based on the territory, and I will explain how convert a plan in real action. First of all, we defined the territories and the production chains. We developed 8 state workshops with the stakeholders. As an example, we select production chains as livestock, beekeeping, aquaculture, fishing, cocoa, coffee, fruits, forest products as Brazilian nuts, açaí, and pupunha. After that, we decide a project portfolio to be submitted for investors, government, etc. Another very important strategy is the governance, and as we all know, Brazil has the huge low carbon agriculture plan, the ABC Plus plan. And we have the look to already have the state governance with stakeholders in the more sustainable Amazon plan. Is connecting to this structure, and you will have the same forum to conduct the plan in the states. This strategy helps us enhance the effectiveness of public policy and achieve the necessary results. Thank you.
Okay, so the National Wildlife Federation have been taking an in-depth look at NDCs. Francisco, take us away.
Thank you, Darren, and thank you, Wong, that are with us here today. And also thank you to my colleagues. Some of them made my life easier. For example, when John talked about traceability. And also because, as was said here, we don't need the perfect scenario to start doing things, to take action, and to really implement things. And also considering that we need to respond to the market and at the same time implement Brazil NDC, we need to identify who are the producers that are not answering to the market and need help to implement the NDCs. So this is part of our work in Brazil, I think needs to help to answer this and make this bridge between these two parts. Next slide, please. We focus on the cattle supply chain or the beef value chain, if we can say so, in Brazil. And in these terms, when we talk about Brazil, the entity or the actor that is responsible to monitor the supply chain and respond about it is the meat packer. So we need to always keep in mind that in terms of monitoring the supply chain, this is the actor that needs to be considered, and we need to look to the supply chain from its perspective to answer to the market. Next slide, please. And when we look to the suppliers, to the meat packer, indirect suppliers are not such a small portion of the supply chain, but they are very, very important because a small amount of indirect suppliers can contaminate a bigger amount of, or a bigger number of direct supplier and a large portion of the beef produced in Brazil, just because we don't have an individual ID system. We have only patch level systems that can right now answer to the market. So this is a problem, and how can we address this problem? Next one, please. Well, they are also important because more than a half of the deforestation that is linked to cattle supply chain nowadays in Brazil are on indirect suppliers. Direct suppliers respond only for 40% of the cattle-related deforestation. So indirect suppliers respond for more than 60% of this deforestation. And tier one indirect suppliers respond for 53% of the deforestation, cattle-related deforestation. So how can we help these producers to be more sustainable? We need to identify them. We need property level information. Next one, please. And to reach these guys, to identify the properties and reach these producers, we can do this with the information that we currently have there in Brazil. We have CAR, the Rural Registry, Environmental Registry, as our colleague from the Ministry of Agriculture mentioned. And we also have another information about transit, that is GTA, and I can explain more about it later. But anyway, if we link these two separated data sets, we can start to identify the properties that are indirect suppliers for the meat packers, and we can encompass them in the monitoring system. It's not easy, it's very complex, but it can be done right now. So this is a great news, I think. Next slide, please. So how can we develop this approach? First of all, property level information, as I mentioned to you. We can trace the cattle supply chain by using this data. We need to consider the life cycle of the animals, so it doesn't matter if I'm looking today who is the indirect supplier of my direct supplier today. It doesn't matter, because the cattle that is being slaughtered today, it was bought 1 to 2 years ago. So I need to look for the indirect suppliers that were for, that supplied this direct supplier 1 or 2 years ago, and check who are they, where are the properties, and how they were at that moment. We need to consider the life cycle of the cattle. We also need to comply with the market rules, and we need the minimum transparency, as was also said here before. Next slide, please. So considering this, there is a problem, I think, or a bottleneck if we go, if we use batch level information, because one single direct supplier can be linked to 12 indirect suppliers in tier 1, 99 indirect suppliers in tier 2, more than 500 indirect suppliers in tier 3, so it goes on, and we can link these direct suppliers to more than 3,000 indirect suppliers if we go beyond the tier 1. So does the risk of do this worth? I don't think so. The next slide, please. And just, I don't think so, just because the remaining forest, what we need to preserve, most of it are in the indirect, tier 1 indirect suppliers with more than 100 hectares. So if we sum the direct suppliers that are already being monitored by the meat packers with the tier 1 indirect suppliers with more than 100 hectares, we can achieve more than 90% of the remaining forest being monitored by this kind of system. So why should we take all the risk going beyond tier 1 if the result is not the kind of result, or it doesn't worth the result or the risk? The next slide, please. So in terms of conclusions, regardless the databases that are used to develop the monitoring system, traceability systems should be designed from a meat packer perspective. They are the ones that are responsible to monitor the supply chain. We need to take this in consideration. Secondly, GTA plus car is the fastest way that we can have some kind of result in terms of monitoring the indirect suppliers. It is not perfect, I agree, but it can be immediately implemented, bring results, and also it's the most cost effective because the system is there. Producers already have their car, already have their GTA, so it doesn't add more costs for the production system. It provides actionable information, so meat packers can identify the properties and go there and help these producers and align the NDCs with the market demands and implement action in field. And it can help to scale up the monitoring systems all over the country, because we have these for all the biomes and for all the states in Brazil. I think that these are the most important things that I can brought, Darren, so thank you so much.
Thank you. So we've had, today has been clear, we've spent pretty much all of our time focusing on Brazil. But what's also clear about everything that we've talked about today is that the laws, the data, the NDCs, they don't just apply to one country, they apply to us all. So, Natalie, that's your job, is to bring us home and explain, I suppose, the wider perspective.
Right, thank you very much. So yes, as Darren says, I'm going to attempt to sort of bring sort of the lessons that we've learned from all the speakers today and really bring it to this conference and the NDCs. So NDCs, the nationally determined contributions, which are written by each country, and they set their goal for what their target is and how they're going to achieve their goals of the Paris Agreement. So it's really the centerpiece that brings together all the different aspects of the negotiations happening around us into one point. And these NDCs are updated every 5 years. But even though they set an ambition, the ambition itself is not nearly enough to get us to where we need to be to fulfill the goals of the Paris Agreement. And so I'm just going to look at sort of where we are now, where we need to get to, and what types of steps we can take to, using the public sector and the private sector and market that we've heard about today, to really harness the power of nature to get us towards the goals we need to be at. Thank you. Next slide. So currently there is, at this conference, they're conducting the first global stock take. So that's looking at not our ambition, but really where we are today and where are we on track to get to. And the current projections are we're between 2.5 to 2.9 degrees Celsius of warming, and we need to limit it and cap it at 1.5 degrees. And we've heard from other speakers, we cannot do that, we can't get there without nature, without conserving the ecosystems we have, enhancing them, and restoring nature. But NDCs vary greatly in their ambition and their detail. And to really get there, it requires integrating different sectors, right? Because we've heard it's agriculture, which is a major driver of deforestation. So it's important that efforts in agriculture consider their impact on land use change. Of course, land planning is key. And we know overall there's really a lack of consideration. For example, only 14% of NDCs consult with Indigenous people and local communities, and only 5% of NDCs mention issues with land tenure. But some governments give very detailed plans. We heard from my colleague at the Brazilian Ministry of Agriculture about Brazil's plans. They have expanded their low-carbon agriculture program to 2030, and they've set a target of zero deforestation by 2030, and for each biome they're producing a detailed set of measures that they aim to enforce to get there. In terms of bringing in the private sector, Colombia set out 7 ways in which they're aiming to limit their deforestation by 2030, and one of those 7 involves the support for established zero deforestation agreements, which they've set up for many of the key agricultural drivers of deforestation, including beef and dairy. But others are briefer and don't really have set targets. And they're certainly not where they could be to get us towards really harnessing nature's power. And right now, under consideration here at this conference are some of the rules by which the public and private sector can provide support for forest-rich countries, because we've heard how much of the drivers of deforestation is coming from outside forest countries. And so how can we take the measures that we've heard about, the private sector commitments, and really ramp up investment in nature and production? Because it's one thing just to invest in nature itself, but if we know that agriculture is driving that deforestation, we have to find ways to invest in better production methods, better land use, and some of the data points that we've heard about, because as we've heard from my colleagues, you really need to understand where you are to be able to really make improvements and know that your investments are making a difference. and to disincentivize harmful practices and incentivize good production. Next slide, please. So a major new paper was released last month, which sort of assessed what the potential is for conserving ecosystems and restoring forests. And so they said there's up to 226 gigatons of potential there, which is 50 years of emissions currently of the US. Obviously there are multiple benefits. If we do invest in nature, we support healthier environments for everybody, multiple health benefits, for support for forest-dependent communities. So it's a really important investment, and we can really see there's sort of a coming together, because there'd been a lot of discussions about different numbers, of an understanding of the enormous potential in nature. And outside of forest, standing forest and protected areas, 41% of the potential for the carbon sequestration comes from grazing areas, and that's why we've heard today a lot about grazing, and it's really an important key area, especially because much grazing can be improved by simple, low-cost methods which have been implemented, and the methodologies are well known, especially spearheaded by Brazil. But what's lacking is their implementation. And that's going to take some upfront costs, but it hasn't been delivered or disseminated sufficiently. Next slide, please. So here are some of the actions that we believe could be important for enhancing nature and NDCs, reducing emissions, and have multiple benefits for sustainable production. So as I mentioned, some of these improved pasture management practices are very well known and studied, so rotational grazing, better feed restoring degraded areas. There are tens of millions of hectares of degraded land which could be restored to support cattle, and if you do that, you take off pressure on forests. You don't need to clear forests. And if you rotate animals, they don't overgraze, and so you can continually use the same plot of land for years into the future without having it eroded and degraded. And we've heard some of the ways in which the private sector can take action. And some of this is through, there are a number of different commitments on deforestation. There's also national and a global roundtable for sustainable beef, which has also national bodies in it, and it's set a goal by 2030 of the beef sector having a net positive benefit on nature. But that's going to take funding. It's going to take more money. We know that there's only a quarter of the money necessary available right now for investing in nature. And to support and disseminate the better practices in agriculture, it's going to take even more money. And so the UNFCCC offers an opportunity to bring international money, both private sector and public sector money, but in a way that can support better practices, enhance livelihoods, and being done in a way where we can really objectively measure the impact. And that's some of the discussions here, but we'd really like to see there be a focus on nature-based solutions. We believe that sort of outside, that they haven't received as much attention as they could, and we think it's really important to take on board some of the specific details and data that we've heard about today and communicate that better to policymakers so that they can understand there are very concrete actions that can have an impact. We've seen huge improvements in recent years on forest monitoring. We can harness all of that to really ensure that the benefits can be delivered on the ground where they're needed and that we can measure the impact. So overall, we've learned today that we have the means, the technology, and the awareness of urgency of addressing deforestation, but there remains a funding gap which public and private investment can support. And more ambitious NDCs, including practical activities and targeted goals to support nature-based solutions, can encourage this investment and capitalize on the tens or even hundreds of gigatons of carbon potential that can play a pivotal role in us reaching our 1.5-degree target. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have time, if people have them, for questions. If you have any questions for our esteemed panel, these are some of the finest minds in the NGO world, so feel free to throw anything at them. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Hi, I'm João Gonçalves and the Mighty Earth Brazil director. Very nice to be here, to see so many familiar faces. Very good exposure, so thanks so much. I have a question, maybe I will address to Jean from WWF, about how we can use this data and this information to really move the corporates. I'm saying that because we just released today a report, a kind of alert system report on deforestation, bringing lights to recent deforestation cases in Brazil, and we share this information with all the related companies, including meat packers and retailers, and they just gave back to us like kind of vague replies, you know. So, for example, we detected one deforestation of 200 hectares in Cerrado, in Brazil. That was early in September this year, so it's really recent. And what we can do to make the companies work to not make this deforestation bigger. Like in 2 months, this 200 deforestation can become like 2,000. How can we work to stop that?
Jean?
It's a good question. So, of course, we are in the transition, yeah? And so in transitions, it's natural that you're having uncertainty. Uncertainty creates resistance. But what we see is that while you're having different levels of discussions happening. So one is more publicly and sometimes collectively. You might have stronger public resistance to these changes and a lot of complaints also on the need to make the change. But on the other hand, you have companies organizing themselves already. Many companies are having powerful systems for traceability already in-house. The larger companies have, and they can engage the smaller companies to do that. So there is a question of will. There is a question of building up the cost-benefit of what is the best solution to make that happen. And of course, in that sense, we can also try to help clarify some things. Like talking to the European authorities to understand better how things can work and how they can be implemented, and really go into the practicalities. This is why I tried to put some more practical examples here in these talks. That we need to talk about solutions now. We need to talk about very pragmatic solutions on how to implement things. Some of these informations may seem even like superficial for who is in this business, but we know that they are working hard, ready to build up and prepare themselves for the deadline of the EUDR implementation. So we are having another big role is to also stand for the law being better, include other wooded land. And for the implementation of the legislation, that is not necessarily a bad thing, because we know that sometimes it's hard to separate forests from savannas in places where they're all mixed up, but actually there is very strong data in many places that combine forests and other wooded land. So it could even make solutions easier for implementation and safer. So also we have to help on providing as much information to the general public so that we also have support from the society on this transparency system. And in that sense, there is something that really needs to be well studied and talked to together with the communities, is all what is related to the smallholders. What are the solutions and the opportunities that can be provided for the smallholder situation, so that they are not considered as a main obstacle to the legislation, where sometimes that kind of requirement of traceability and transparency can provide opportunities on land claims, on having more fair, less I would say asymmetrical relationship with some big buyers and so on. So like we see that there is a lot of work that we can do in that sense as well. But I think, of course, so we have to have clear message to the society, clear message to the private sector, to the governments, as well as having also proactive dialogue to try to find and build up very concrete solutions. No one has having the exact full response right now. We are in a moment of great novelty. It's a game changer. And we are all, trying to make the best of this opportunity to consider supply chains that are free from destruction.
Thank you. Yeah, gentleman there.
Thank you. Let me first of all appreciate the resource people seated. And I am Husseini, I'm from Nigeria, and Special Advisor on Environment. And I also supervise Red Plus and afforestation project. And I know that the discussion for today has been so contradictory. We're having it struggling between conservation and development, and knowing fully well that some of our area we come from are battling with serious population expansion, and I'm not going to really discuss on make comment on the livestock impacts causing deforestation, but the human area of it, where the issue of unemployment have been causing serious deforestation, and development, particularly the use of log and everything. So we have discussed law, we have discussed the data, we have discussed the NDC, but going to the issue of finance, we have not really seen the finance to address the area of adaptation and resilience. We have not seen the finance. We always see people, so many nationals making commitment, and it's been all bottlenecked to get finance to address this issue. So I'm going to the resource lady. Please, what are the things the financial institution looking at or targeting based on data required to be able to fund certain things that we halt the massive deforestation, please?
So if I could repeat the question is that how do we engage with financial institutions to ensure that they are not financing deforestation, but instead supporting the types of activities that are sustainable commodity production? Is that correct?
Yeah, looking at the area you are looking at for funding to discourage deforestation.
Yes.
What are the projects you are actually interested, or the financial institutions are interested that will discourage deforestation?
Yeah, so I mean, the very first step is to really understand what kind of exposure they have in their investments and their loan portfolios. So that's why we have provided data and guidance to help them assess the deforestation exposure risk. So basically, they would have to assess the companies or the industry sectors that they are lending to or investing in to basically understand how much of their current portfolio and to prioritize which are the companies they need to talk to first. So that's really the first step. The second step is to have, for the financial institutions to have a policy and commitment to end deforestation within their portfolio. So that means they have to be very clear what they're going to do and when they're going to do it by. And the third step is to really start talking to those companies to first of all tell them this is a priority. We will not be financing deforestation linked activities. What are you doing to become compliant? And a very important part of that is really to provide the support that is needed to help supply chain actors to become compliant. So that's in the form of leverage, in the form of technical support, directing them to the right service providers and associations that can help them to the right framework, such as the accountability framework, which shows producers how to become deforestation free, providing support for traceability and reporting and monitoring and verification systems. So that's really, those are really all the steps that the financial institutions need to take action on.
I think we've got time for one more question. Over there.
Thank you so much. That was a fantastic panel. My name is Scott Francisco. I'm one of the founders of Cities for Forests, which is a collaboration with World Resources Institute. We have now 100 cities in our network, and one of the tools that we've created is called the Forest Footprint for Cities, which looks at imported deforestation into cities around the world. So cities can now use this tool to see how much, for example, New York City, 13,000 hectares annually of tropical deforestation based on the consumption of the city, and that's broken down. The tricky part is having cities act on that, and so we've created an action plan, but we really want to reach out, and I guess this is an open question for further discussion, is we have the city's attention. These can be integrated into their climate action planning. There's, I think it's over 1.5 million tons of CO2 that's not counted on, say, New York City's climate action plan currently. That's a big number when they're doing a climate action plan. So we've got their attention. But policies that actually can come from the municipal level that can start taking this kind of action are tricky and kind of critical. So if there's any ideas that you would have to share, I'd love to hear them.
Nicole?
Yes, thank you. You might have heard that the US Forest Act has been reintroduced. So cities actively going to see the lawmakers, asking for demand-side regulation might be one of them. And secondly, procurement policies at city level are also a tool that you could envisage.
Just complementing, I would have said the same. But the third thing would be also communication. So awareness of the consumers, awareness of the general public on the issue is a critical element as well.
Just for the microphone, forestfootprint.org. Fabulous. We are at time. I just want to say thank you all for being here. Thank you very, very much to my panel. What we hope this has been is we hope this has been solutions focused, because we are at the stage where we just have to come up with solutions. We have to find ways of working and of making a difference, because there is no answer to the climate crisis without also solving the nature crisis. So thank you all very much. Thank you to my panel. Good night.